What's going on, y'all? Harry from Harry the Horse Barbecue here, and in this one, I am not horsing around with these Weber Kettle spare ribs. We're gonna season up some spare ribs in a Central Texas style, smoke them off on the Weber Kettle to get some amazing smoke flavor and deep, dark, rich color, hit them with a sweet spritz and glaze, and then we'll slice on into some super simple spares. Looking for some easy smoked spare ribs? The horse has got your back. Let's get it.
Harry the Horse Barbecue.
That's right, the horse is back again, breaking out this old hunk of metal to make some spare ribs on the Weber Kettle. But I've been going back to basics cooking on this Weber Kettle to help y'all at home smoke up some super simple and super delicious classic Texas style barbecue. And spare ribs are not the easiest cook, but it's not the most difficult cook. It's that sweet spot right in the middle, and you know they're not gonna be horsing around. So in order to make these spare ribs, we gotta go shopping for some ribs. And let's go. Spare ribs. Now I picked these spare ribs up from my local grocery store, and one thing I've learned about cooking spare ribs is that an all-natural commodity grade spare rib pretty much works the best for backyard barbecue. So enough horsing around, let's get these ribs out of the pack. That's a pretty beautiful rack. What? Now these are some meaty looking spares, and you can see how great the marbling is within the meat. But if you want some spare ribs, try to get the meatiest ones so you don't get any shiners poking through. This particular rack is looking really nice, no shiners to speak of. And that chine bone or that breastplate has been taken off already. So I'm gonna shape up this backside a little bit by taking off some fat. I'm gonna work that down just a wee bit. Not too much of this skirt left. Skirt! Right now I've got a little baby bone on this end, and the first bone really doesn't materialize until about here. Square off this end as close to that rib as possible. And there's not much left to do other than take down a little bit of this fat here. Normally there's a muscle hanging on here, which you would definitely want to take off. But I like to leave a little fat there. Helps protect this section, especially on the Weber Kettle, where we know the cooker is hottest around the edges. Just gonna fan these ribs out as best as I can, and then just start to give it some shape. I just followed the natural curve from where they took this chine bone off, came up and around, just kind of squared it up, rounded it off. And I've changed my mind at this point. I am gonna take off this baby rib, but it's a small rack, so it'll fit on the Weber Kettle. It's got beautiful shape to it. Let's season her up. So we're gonna start these ribs off with some Pitmaster salt. Shout out Brad. Now ribs are one of the only cuts in barbecue where I'll season layer by layer. This allows me to control the salt level, especially on a thin cut like ribs. And our next layer is some Pitmaster pepper, and we season in the direction of the bones for that beautiful presentation. Or go on with a third layer of some seasoned salt lick. And a lot of people don't bother to season the underside of ribs heavily or with extra layers, but I tell you, when you bite into the rib, your tongue hits the underside of the rib first, so this is gonna add a pop of flavor and make these ribs a much more enjoyable eating experience. Give her a flip around. And the same deal on the top side. And the reason we do the bottom side first is because this is our presentation side, and we want to make this look as pretty as possible because we eat with our eyes first. Our Pitmaster pepper, it's going to look beautiful all the way across, nice and even, help us attract some of that smoke. And again, for that pop of flavor, right over the top with our seasoned salt lick. And those are some Central Texas style spare ribs if I've ever seen some, and they're not horsing around. Now there is no room left to spare for seasoning anywhere on these spares. They're looking gorgeous with that 16 mesh black pepper, the kosher salt, the seasoned salt lick. Now those are looking like some serious Central Texas style spares. But these ribs are all seasoned up and they're ready for the cooker. So let's go fire up the cooker. This beautiful vintage Weber Kettle. Fogo's a go-go. A single beefy snake nest, and a couple janky pieces of wood. 1, 2, and 3. Now all we gotta do is let these coals get hot. A couple puffs to keep these coals going. It's too icy to go run and grab those ribs, so let's just lay them oh so gently onto the Weber. And as easy as possible, we lay those ribs right on. Now I think this orientation makes sense for the spare ribs because the natural curvature of the spare rib nearly matches the natural curvature of the Weber Kettle. And I think we've got enough degree of separation between the ribs and the fire, so I don't think we're gonna run the risk of burning any part of the ribs. And I have an aluminum tray underneath the ribs just to catch any grease. All right, y'all, we got these Texas spares sitting beautiful beautifully on this Weber kettle, and a few hours of smoke will really help set that bark and add a ton of smoke flavor to these ribs. Now I'm looking to rock this fire at about 250 degrees the entire cook. If we run the temps higher than that, we run the risk of burning those tender, delicate edges of these spare ribs, and anything lower, and I'm gonna be freezing my tuchus off out here in the middle of February. I've got the one damper beneath the fire cracked just a wee bit, while the other two dampers on this vintage Weber kettle are completely closed, and I've got the vent on the lid open about halfway to help promote some airflow and build some smoky flavor on these ribs. All that's left to do now is close it down. Boom, shakalaka. All right, y'all, we're approaching about 3 hours on these Texas spares. We've been rocking a pretty solid 250. Let's take a looky-loo at these spares, and then I'll show y'all the game plan for the next phase of this cook. Not looking too shabby. You can definitely see that these ribs are getting darkest around the perimeter of the ribs, and the center is still a little bit light. That's most likely because the airflow is going over the ribs and then being sucked out. We're definitely gonna have to protect the perimeter and the edges. At this rate, I'm gonna hit the ribs with some apple cider vinegar just to cool them off just a little bit. So our fire's getting a little out of control. So we're gonna rebuild it. Pretty much gonna take as many lit coals as I can and move it to one side. Start adding in some new charcoal for the second phase of the cook. Gonna toss in a couple more random little pieces of wood. And because our bark is more or less set on the presentation side, we are going to flip these ribs. There's meat back here that should be exposed more to the smoke. We could also crisp up part of this membrane in the process and render some of the fat that lies beneath the membrane and that's still sitting on the backside of these ribs. And we'll rock it like this, about 250 to 275 for the next hour or so. Boom. I literally just closed down the kettle and I made a couple quick changes immediately. First, I took out one of those pieces of wood that I put in. I didn't want to over smoke these ribs. Second, I refilled the water reservoir with a bunch of water. That way we can still have some humidity flowing through the kettle and minimize the burning or darkening of any edges. I've got a second rack of spares chilling in the offset, but I'm telling you, they look very similar to our Weber kettle spare ribs. Let me know if y'all want to see a Weber kettle versus offset spare rib comparison. But right now, temps are running about 250, 275, and I'll bring y'all back when we add some sweetness and wrap up these ribs. We ain't horsing around with this one, so hit that subscribe button and let's move on to the last phase of these ribs. All right, y'all, we're a little over the 6 hour mark on these spare ribs. And at this rate, I'm gonna start to add some sweetness to these ribs, just in the form of this maple syrup. And I don't know if y'all can see, but they are looking pretty darn sweet. So I'm just using the nozzle from my squirt bottle, and I'm just gonna spray some maple syrup all over the top of these ribs. We'll give these ribs about 30 minutes to tack up with that maple syrup, then we'll check them again, and then I'll bring y'all back when I wrap these in foil and hit them with some more maple syrup. Those ribs are looking sweet, and I had to bare hand them in all the way from outside. We have some good red color all the way around, some pretty good fat render going on, and now I'm just gonna hit this with more maple syrup all over the top. A little more maple on that back end to complement all the savoriness of the rub. Pro tip on wrapping ribs, run your fingers over the top of the ribs like this. Crease it, fold in, crease it again, back on in. That way nothing can poke through the foil. Similar on the bone side, run my fingers across, boom. And that's all she wrote. But I'm gonna throw these back onto the cooker outside at about 275 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll meet y'all back when it's time to slice. Well, after going back onto the pit for about an hour and 15 minutes, and then after about a 30 to 45 minute rest, these spares are ready to slice in, and I cannot wait. Good Lord. I don't know if I've ever seen a prettier rack of spare ribs. Nice red color, that bark has set in. Some really nice looking pullback on the bones. They're still extremely hot, but let's give them a shot. I think my favorite ribs generally come from this section over here. Beautiful smoke penetration here. They're literally just glistening all the way across. That bark there is amazing. Let's see how they turned out. Pop off that knuckle meat real quick. The flavors are just insane. They're biting clean off the bone. Perfect cook on these. They're so savory, but then you're hit with that little bit of sweetness from the maple syrup. I mean, y'all tell me how they cooked up. I know a lot of people love this end cut of the rib. So much bark on there. Just look at that bite mark. Clean all the way to the bone. These are not horsing around, and they're so easy to make. These Weber kettle spare ribs are so good, I just can't stop. And I'm not horsing around when I say that. They're salty, they're savory, they're a little bit sweet, and they definitely can't be beat. Hold your horses. These spare ribs are ridiculous off of that Weber Kettle. And I'm already on my third rib. When they're clean off the bone like this, you just can't ask for anything more. So even if you don't have an offset at home, you can make Central Texas style spare ribs that are essentially on par with some offset smoker ribs. I mean, you've seen them. They're juicy, they've got a beautiful bark on them, and they're hitting every flavor profile that you're gonna want in a rib. So stop horsing around and make these. Snow is falling outside, so I'm gonna cozy up and dream of some sweet yet savory lyrics. Here we go. Whoa, I'm feeling clean in this dream. Cool? Yeah, let me say, these ribs look like they just came out of Texas. I ain't lying, not trying to be pretentious. Just try me, the flavor is infectious. Hit that sub button for the hustle and respect this. Thank y'all for tuning into Harry the Horse Barbecue. I really appreciate you checking out this video. Make sure you subscribe for the vibes, leave a like for those ribs, and comment with what you want to see me cook next on the Weber Kettle. You can tag me on Instagram at Harry the Horse Barbecue because your cooks inspired me to get out there and cook. And with that being said, there's only one more thing, y'all. Happy Valentine's Day. I love y'all. And these are going straight to the horse's mouth. We'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace. Gotta go fix the sweetie tooth.